Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Westside Unitarian Universalist Church or Community. I'm Suzanne Molnar, as I think you all know, a member of the Worship Committee, and I'm the Worship Associate today. We're a diverse theological group who are bound by commitments to each other and to our community and to the wide earth, which we're privileged to have as our home. There are some announcements today. There'll be a virtual coffee hour at 11:30. You're already on Zoom, you don't have to do anything. Our Share the Plate partner, this whole quarter, all the way through June, is GLSEN Tennessee branch, which but the gay, lesbian, basically student support education network, which does really good work for LGBTQ inclusiveness, aimed especially at student age people, teenage. Other announcements. We're in the middle of the pledge campaign, and as you may or may not have gotten letters yet with pledge forms, you can return those in person. If you do come, you can put them in the mail, or you can just email me with your pledge. I don't need the form scanned, even just, you saying, this is me, this is what I'm pledging for next fiscal year, that's that. And we are continuing to have the adult RE discussion group Thursday, 6:30. So that's continuing. And the plan at this point is to continue having a 10 o'clock service, which this morning was chilly and windy, but it's beautiful here. And also at 11 o'clock, the virtual service. So David has words for Chalice Lighting. I'll light Chalice and use the singing bowl.
So as Suzanne is lighting that, I looked in a book that I have on Zen stories and found one that I thought was appropriate to what I have to say. I hope that you're able to see it also. When Chiano studied Zen, she was unable to attain the fruits of meditation for a long time. At last, one moonlit night, she was carrying water in an old pail bound with bamboo. The bamboo broke and the bottom fell out of the pail. And at that moment, Chiano was set free. In commemoration, she wrote a poem. In this way and that, I tried to save the old pail, since the bamboo strip was weakening and about to break, until at last the bottom fell out. No more water in the pail, no more moon in the water. So I'm going to talk this morning about some thoughts that I've had about three things in my life that have intersected with each other, and as intersections do, shed some light on each other. As a kind of preface to that, I was told by a friend of mine who was an historian something that I thought and have continued to think was very wise. She said, when you read something, an essay or a book, or listen to someone talk, one of the first questions you want to ask yourself is, who is the intended audience? I found that to be very useful. I can understand things that I read and hear better when I understand what the intended audience is. And I've also tried to use it when I speak myself. With classes, it tends to be pretty easy, because they're all pretty much of a single kind, and I direct single age, single situation and I'm able to direct what I have to say. But either today live before and now Zoom now, there's quite of a variety of audience. And so I am not really sure have not been really sure who the audience that I'm aiming this at is. But by the time I'm done, I will re-mention it, and perhaps you will have some thoughts on it. So, in fairly recent time, there are three things that have intersected each other. And as I said, in the intersection, cast light upon each other. The first one was an interview that I heard with Margaret Atwood, best known as the author of the book, The Handmaid's Tale. The Handmaid's Tale, in case you don't know, is a book about a kind of dystopia in the future when the United States is broken down. And part of it is a theocracy in which women are used simply as childbearing machines. They have no individuality, they have no freedom. Most women are unable to bear children, and so other women are simply put into this job to do. Now, it isn't the content of that story which interested me so much. It was rather in the interview, she said that when my book came out, and it was a number of decades ago, The Handmaid's Tale, though it was received very positively by critics, it didn't have a wide audience. It has a wide audience now. There's a Netflix series that is a presentation of it. It has received other kinds of popularizations. But when she wrote it, she said it was for a fairly small audience. And then she said, perhaps this was a good thing. If I had become famous and successful back when I was young, then where was there to go from there but down? Now, I have long used a device when you hear a rhetorical question, and this is a rhetorical question, where is there to go but down? Only one answer, down. That when you hear a rhetorical question, it is very often helpful to treat it as a real question and wonder what other kinds of answers there might be. And so that's what I did with this question. Whatever successes or failures you have or have had not in the past, and everyone hearing me surely has had a variety of both, perhaps what they think of more as one or the other, but we've all failed in some ways, and we've all succeeded in some ways, and we're all always looking back upon the selves that we used to be and judging the selves that we used to be. So what do we do when we become old and we pass the time of our accomplishments, the time in which we are still climbing mountains, the time in which we're still judging by how much we have done and how well we are known and how people think of us and so on, and all the things like that? One answer is, of course, the answer that Atwood gives, which is you simply fall off the edge and you don't count any longer. But there's a different answer, and an answer that I think is a much more useful one to try. That when you get older and you're looking back at your past, you do it in a non-judgmental way. Now, non-judgmental is a rather scary word. You're likely to think how hard it is. Jesus says, do not judge. And the Buddha would say, when you are meditating, no judgment whatsoever is going on. And this seems like such an incredibly hard thing to do. And the fact that Jesus could do it and the Buddha could do it probably isn't very helpful for us. How are we, far inferior to them, going to do it? But what I want to suggest here is that it isn't really all that hard to be non-judgmental. It is simply what you don't do. You just look back upon, in this case, the selves that you used to be, what you did and didn't do for good and for ill, and just observe them. You don't think about whether, you don't concern yourself any longer with whether they were on some kind of a path to lead to further success and further glory, or better kinds of judgments you could pass on yourself. You just observe them happening. Isn't that interesting? Look at what that fellow did, that fellow being an earlier version of yourself. Non-judgmental, not judging, isn't a question of doing really, really hard things. It is rather not doing. And it isn't that hard to not do. And it is easier, I think, when one is older, when your time for accomplishment, your time in which you are competing with yourself, competing with others, looking back upon what you have done, and you're simply now an observer of this, almost on the outside from it. So the first thing then, of the three things that intersected for me, was this idea, where is there now to go that we are old? And all of my audience here is not old, but this is a UU church and a fair number of us are. One looks back and simply stops thinking about what it is that's a success and what it is that's a failure, what it is that's an accomplishment, what it is that was better not done, and so on, and just observe these things happening. The second thing that intersected, you can see immediately how well this fit into the first. My daughter, I will hold this up, gave me a book called Dad's Journal, What I Want You to Know About Me and My Life. And it consists of 100 questions, really very nicely constructed questions, looking back upon your life. And this is what it was like, and this is what happened to me. So this became an exercise in, now that I am past the stage of accomplishment, what is it that there is left for me to do? Well, to think about, to write about, and here's a vehicle in which I can write about the things that I have done, the things that have happened to me. Notice the pairing there, the things that I have done, the way I've affected the world, and the things that have happened to me, the way the world has affected me. The third thing that fit into this, and again, you can easily see how they so naturally intersect with each other. First, there is, what do I do now that I'm no longer in the stage of accomplishment? The second is, here are a bunch of questions to answer about what it was like when I was younger. And the third is more than a year of COVID. Now, this varies from person to person, and I haven't led an isolated life. I have friends that I walk with pretty much every morning, and I have a group of old guy coffee drinkers that I get together with, and I have seen members of the family fairly regularly. But the bottom line fact is 23 hours in the day I spend by myself. That is a pretty daunting thing. I come back talking with friends, and that's nice. And then most days, it will be 23 hours before I can contact another human being. If you're thinking of Zoom and things like that, by the way, I'll get to that issue in just a very few minutes. One of the important things about what COVID has done is simply how long it's lasted. If it's a matter of a couple of weeks of enforced solitude, and when you are single by yourself, living by yourself as I do, it really is enforced solitude. One of the important things about enforced solitude is that if it's only for a couple of weeks, then you put yourself in a kind of an artificial situation for those couple of weeks, and then you go back to the norm again, go back to the way things were, expecting them to be the same, and they probably will be a couple of weeks, but not with COVID. With COVID, this has gone on more than a year. If after 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, you have not begun to think about and adjust and adapt yourself to a world in which, at least in my case, 23 hours out of 24 every day is probably spent with only yourself as company. If you've not done something to adjust to that, then you are probably having a very difficult time. So these three things intersected for me. And I then thought about the way in which I am now an old person. I am now an alone person. I have been for a long time. Probably the way that we used to do things is not going to come again. And I'm going to have to get used to this and adjust this. And here I have this very nice book in which I can talk about my life and how I look at it. Now, the questions in this book are fairly well written, and I will just read a couple of them and my answers to those couple. But one of the striking things about it, if you are paying any attention at all, is all the stories that we make up, all the pretending that we do about this is the way things really were. It's a lifelong job to simply pretend that this is who I was and this is who I am now. I am not being cynical. Well, I am being cynical, but it is such a human thing to do, to have our agendas all the time and constantly be trying to work with those agendas. So let me read one of the questions from the book. The book is divided into, among other things, childhood years, teenage years, and adult years, and this comes in the adult section. If you were going to be stranded on a desert island for a year, what would you pack to bring with you? My answer, as anybody who knows me at all, was as many books as allowed, books that could be read over and over without getting to the bottom of them, and writing implements so that I could record my feelings and thoughts over the course of the year to see how they, that is, the feelings and thoughts, changed as I expect they would. Notice what a marvelous metaphor desert island is here. The enforced solitariness of COVID has been a kind of desert island thing. That's why it's called a desert island, is that it is deserted away from the normal things that we're used to and the normal stories that we tell about things. I went on to say, but not tools to shape my environment, to make it into something. I'm not very good at that. I'm assuming that the physical necessities of life will be provided. It is the mental necessities and the shaping of myself that now interests me. That metaphor, I've fallen more and more in love with metaphors of a desert island and how important it was to the way in which these things intersected for me, and I think for an awful lot of people, is that it has lasted so long. If you knew that it was going to be done quickly, then you could just create a kind of pretend world to get through it and then back to other things. But it's gone on and on and on. And then it becomes the normal and you have to deal with it. My answer with what to bring along is an answer predicated on this is a time to turn inward, not outward. It doesn't mean that turning outward is a bad thing. Certainly when you're at the stages of your life that are a matter of accomplishing in work, accomplishing in family, accomplishing in community. If you're at a time in which accomplishments are what define you and the way in which you understand yourself, then looking out is a good thing to do. But the time comes, and COVID did it to us whether we liked it or not, in which you increasingly have to look in. And when you look in, increasingly become, if you're at all aware, how much of it you faked, how much of it you've pretended, how much of it you've made up so that it fits what it is that you want it to be. A quick political comment here, just a quick one. This is true of our political world as well as it is of our private world. I want to talk today almost entirely about private worlds, us as individuals, us as dealing with friends and family, particularly when we have to do it now in a way that we didn't do it before. But politically, the same kind of thing has happened. And it seems to me that we are having a great deal of difficulty, not surprisingly, in dealing with these new circumstances. Honesty becomes a primary, I don't want to say moral in the sense that it's wrong not to do it, but honesty becomes required. When I'm looking in a lot, simply because I'm by myself a lot, then the more honest I become, the more that I can deal with it in a sane and workable kind of way. And also, I think because it's been going on for so long, and many people have commented on this, whatever the new normal is going to be, it's not going to be the same kind of normal. Mostly, when people say this, they're talking about the political sphere and the social sphere and the educational sphere and so on, all those things out there. But I think that it is appropriate for the private personal sphere as well, to go back to a world in which you are more communication, more reinforcement, more energizing from other people because you are with them a lot. That's not going to be the same as it was either. There's a second question. There's a lot of good ones in here, but I have to keep the time to some kind of reasonable length. And this one is one that particularly struck me. The question is there a modern day invention that you consider dangerous? Something you would prefer the world be without? I thought about this for quite a while. A nice thing of having a book like this is you don't have to write an answer immediately. You mull it over and think about it and think about other things, and then it gradually gels and falls into place. And so I wrote, there is a real risk here of being a grouchy old man talking about the good old days, which are usually an airbrushed fantasy of what never was. And I really do try to take that seriously. It is too easy to become the old curmudgeon, who's simply complaining about, well, it used to be good, but now, of course, the whole world is falling apart kind of stuff. And it needs to be avoided because even if there's some truth in it, there's a lot of pretense in it as well. Still, right? But even though I don't want to be the curmudgeonly old man, still, I fear the growing reality of computer-driven virtual worlds. What we've had to deal with in the church here with Zoom meetings, as I'm doing right now, which are so different than when we can actually be in the presence, the physical presence of someone else. It has always been the case that we are strangers to each other. To know the world as it is and other people as they really are, not as we are told they are or as we want them to be, is a lifelong task. The same is true of knowing ourselves. An almost endless list of illusions is the default position. Writing in this book has made me more aware of my own failures and self-serving agendas. The best defense against this all too human tendency is to be fully present to a wide variety of people and people and places. Fully presence has to include physical presence, all the body language and emotional language, so that we can actually see and hear what's there. I'm certainly aware that doing this talk this time is quite different for me than it was outside with live people, and I could see the expressions on their faces and their body language and all those things, and I'm just so much more used to and more comfortable than that. But this is the way the world is now. So we can actually see and hear what's there. It's not silly to say that emojis don't do it. With the creation and prevalence of virtual communication, parentheses, what an oxymoron that is. Virtual communication. What it does is to create another distorting barrier. We can then more easily only be with and pretend talk with others like ourselves, or what we imagine as ourselves. But of course, it is comfortable to limit ourselves to what we are familiar with. Uncomfortable is better. Uncomfortable means we've taken something that we need to deal with and are trying to deal with it. I came to a class I was teaching one time where a half dozen students were all on their phones. This is before the class officially started. I asked one why she was talking on her phone instead of with the people there. She replied, on the phone, I can end it when I want to. I've never forgotten that because, of course, she's right. And when the question was, is there some modern invention that you really think is dangerous, that you can end something when you want to on your own terms, that surely is dangerous. Notice you want to say at this point, because you don't live and grow in the same way. But part of what's going on here, certainly for me and many people like me, and for others not like me yet, it will be like this at some point, is that the growing gets to be different. The growing gets to be non-judgmental. The growing gets to be looking back, trying to get a handle on all the self-serving agendas. Boy, if that doesn't sound familiar to you, then you need to look a little more carefully. All the self-serving agendas that we have, that we manage to reinforce, that we manage to keep alive. But it's harder when you're faced with doing it hour after hour, day after day, week after week, month after month. I guess that's why traditionally, when people decided to become the most serious meditators, they went and did it by themselves, because now you are faced with yourself. So back to what I started with, which is, who's my audience? And in one sense, of course, the audience is people who are like me in my position, who've gone through the kind of thing I have for the last year. But just as much, it's to people who cannot, quite properly, cannot envision that yet. They are still in the stage of accomplishment. They are still in the stage of succeeding and failing. To say to you, if you are at this stage of life, it will come. And you will reach a point in which your business will be looking inside yourself and looking back on yourself and trying to see who it is that has come to be in all these varied forms as honestly as you can over a long period of time. Thank you.
Closing words for today come from our hymnal, written by Nancy Wood. Hold on to what is good, even if it is a handful of earth. Hold on to what you believe, even if it is a tree that stands by itself. Hold on to what you must do, even if it is a long way from here. Hold on to my hand, even when I have gone away from you. Let it be so.